And so we'll get started. This is the first presentation of the semester and of the year. And I am absolutely delighted to welcome our speaker, Melissa Dark. Melissa was one of the early members of the staff and then faculty of CERIAS in our early days here at Purdue. She served as assistant director there for a number of years and helped run a number of programs. She helped get the InfoSec interdisciplinary degree started here at Purdue. And for a number of years, she was the W.C. Furness professor in the computer network information technology and what is now the Polytechnic, while also serving there as assistant and then as associate dean. In recent years, she's been running a nonprofit, and there's some information about that, not only in her bio, but in the presentation she's going to give us. She's had an incredible impact on cybersecurity education, not only at Purdue, but nationally, and perhaps even internationally. And without further introduction, let me introduce our star for the day, Dr. Melissa Dark. Melissa.
Thank you, Spaff. This is, in a lot of ways, it is like a homecoming. So when Spaff reached out and asked if I would like to talk, I said, yes, of course. I think I was supposed to do this maybe last November, and I lost my dad, so I rescheduled here to 2022. I did start at CERIAS in 2000. And when I started at CERIAS in the year 2000, Purdue was one of only 7 universities in the United States recognized for its information security program. And now I think we use the term cybersecurity, but at that point in time, we really used the term information security. So much has changed in just 22 years. So Purdue still in my heart and mind is one of the flagship schools for educating students and producing quality research in cybersecurity. But today we sit at about 350 institutions of higher education, universities, colleges, and community colleges that offer cybersecurity degrees to students. And so much of this work over the last 22 years, 25 years has been to try to build a workforce. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the next generation cybersecurity workforce. I wanted to talk about progress, and I want to also talk a little bit about challenges. So I've been in this space now for almost 22 years. When Spaff first hired me, he hired another woman, and he said, Melissa, what I'd like you to work on is education initiatives for everything 18 years and older. So they will have already graduated from high school. Any education initiative to do cybersecurity education for somebody who is over the age of 18 is fair game. And he hired another woman who was going to work on K-12 and did work on K-12. So as the talk, I think, unfolds, you'll see that I have now migrated to the K-12 space. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think the workforce challenge is, how I think about the call to action to meet this workforce challenge. I'm going to talk about work to date, and because we only have a little bit of time, I'm going to talk about my current work to date, and then where I see some of it going in the future, and then open it up for some questions. And really, my hope is that some of you who are listening today will get excited about what I'm talking about and look to get involved. So cybersecurity. I think there are two ways that I'd like to characterize the workforce challenge. This is the first way. Cybersecurity involves lots of things: hardware, software, networks, data, people, and the integration of all of this into our daily and physical and social worlds. Cybersecurity matters to a lot of different stakeholders. It matters to society, it matters to corporations, it matters to agencies, state agencies, local agencies, federal agencies. It matters to the national infrastructure. It matters to individuals. And cybersecurity matters because all of these things, society, corporations, individuals, infrastructures, are increasingly reliant. And you all know this because you care about cybersecurity. But when you think about these top two bullets, cybersecurity involves hardware, software, networks, data, people, and the integration of that. Cybersecurity matters to society, corporations, agencies, infrastructure, individuals. It makes talking about motivating and educating people in cybersecurity, it makes it a big, hairy problem. Everyone is a lot of people to educate. Who needs to be educated? What do they need to be educated on? To what extent? To what degree? How much of this is about cyber safety for every single person, just like we do, you know, every single person's expected to wear a seatbelt and to drive defensively. And then what pieces of knowledge in the cybersecurity domain go beyond that cyber safety for every person, and help us think about how do we educate people who are going to build secure systems? Do they need to know different things than people who are not going to build them but are just going to operate them? Do the people who are going to operate secure systems need to know different things from people who are protecting existing infrastructure? Technology changes all the time. How do you keep people continually up to date? So when you think about, you start to peel back the onion on, well, what do we mean about educating people about cybersecurity? There are a lot of other questions that need to be answered. And so we're always trying to think about these questions and how to answer these questions, and how the questions are changing in the face of a pretty significant workforce shortage, right? So I have a number here that says roughly 520,000 unfilled jobs today. I'm sure many of you have seen similar numbers. They might go a little bit lower, it might go a little bit higher. It depends on what information source you're using. This came from using CyberSeek. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics projects a 31% job growth in cybersecurity. So that means that we could potentially be at upwards of 681,000 unfilled jobs by 2029. Current college production, if you take those 350 community colleges, colleges and universities producing people at the associate, baccalaureate, master's, PhD level, it probably is around 23,000, 24,000 per year. So obviously, supply is not coming close to meeting what we have in terms of workforce demand. And this is just looking at it from the sheer numbers. It doesn't break it down and say, well, how many people do we need in systems architecture? How many people do we need in R&D so that we can build more secure systems? How many people do we need in governance and administration and leadership and policy? How many people would we need in analytics? How many people would we need in forensics? So working in this space for 22 years now, 3 years ago, I came to a point in my career where I thought, I don't know if this is where I could have the biggest impact. I had been able to work with SPAF and to work with Joel and CERIAS to help grow those 7 universities that had CAE designation. We mentored other schools. We had faculty development programs. We brought in faculty from other universities, trained these faculty so that they could go back to their home institutions and start growing cybersecurity courses that then would grow into cybersecurity minors, that then would grow into cybersecurity majors. And today, SPAF and I could pull out the list of these schools and we could name names and say, well, we helped get that school started down the path to having a cybersecurity major. And so we were really proud of that work. But when you look at these shortfalls, it's clear that something else has to happen in order to change the landscape and in order to try to provide the kind of cybersecurity workforce that we need in the United States. And so while I was hired initially to work on projects in cybersecurity education that were for anybody 18 and over, and my colleague Judy was hired to work on K-12. About 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I got asked to join 2 projects that were high school projects while I was still at Purdue. And when I got asked to join those projects, I felt that SPAF's vision back in 2000, when he hired me and Judy, and SPAF's vision to hire Judy to do something in the K-12 space, I felt that the time was finally right, that we were ready to start working in K-12 education in cybersecurity. And so one of those projects was a National Science Foundation grant funded by the college, funded by the National Science Foundation to integrate more cybersecurity into the College Board class, Advanced Placement Computer Science Principles. And the second project that I was asked to join 5-6 years ago was Gen Cyber, which is a series of summer camps for either students or teachers funded by the National Security Agency and the National Science Foundation. So I started working on those 2 projects. And at the time that I said yes to both of those projects, in my mind, what I was doing was taking a field trip into K-12 cybersecurity education. But my field trip ended up being a fork in the road. And so I did retire from Purdue 3 years ago. And I, as SPAF mentioned in the introduction, I work full-time in K-12, mostly high school cybersecurity education. So I want to talk now about, if that's the challenge, you know, trying to understand what we need in cybersecurity education, both the numbers as well as where do we need those people, and trying to understand if you have limited resources, limited time, limited money to affect significant change, where can you affect significant change? And I already told you, I decided it would be in the K-12 space and right now in the high school space. So if we look just at that space, I think of the call to action in one of three ways, using one of three metaphors. I first of all think of the call to action as building pipelines. So attracting and retaining students, and pipelines are usually thought of, you know, if this is what you need on the tail end coming out of college, and we'll just say this is the number of students we need coming out of a bachelor's degree. You know, backing up, if that's what you need coming out of a bachelor's degree, how big does this need to be coming out of high school, assuming that you're not going to get all the students who take cybersecurity in high school going into cybersecurity in college. If this is what you need in high school, then backing up, how big does the funnel need to be and what do you need to be doing in middle school to move some students forward from middle school to high school cybersecurity education? And then backing up, what do you need as early as elementary school, assuming that you're always going to have some leakage. So sometimes I think about cybersecurity education and the challenge using this metaphor and the work I'm doing using this metaphor. Sometimes I think about the challenge not using a pipelines metaphor, which is usually applied to institutions, but I think about it using a pathways metaphor. And the pathways metaphor really comes at the problem less from an institutional lens and more from an individual lens. How do you develop routes that are learner friendly and learner facilitating to help them build their knowledge progressively, right? And so how do you think about this challenge and what you do with out of school time activities, and how does somebody learn something in an out of school time activity like a Gen Cyber camp? And then if they learned it in a Gen Cyber camp, how could they build on that once they go back to their high school? If their first exposure to cybersecurity education is in their high school, how might they then seek out an out of school time activity? How do those things work together to feed them into college? How do we analyze how these things are working together and how many people we're getting to go to college? Is it responsive to community priorities? From there, how do these paths lead to the workforce or lead to graduate school? People pick careers having an accumulation of learning experiences. And how do we understand how those learning experiences might be or might not be contributing to the workforce, the size and the nature of the workforce that we're trying to build? So that's kind of that lens. And then the third lens that I like to use in thinking about my work is ecosystems. So no two places are the same. When I was at Purdue, Spaff and I we had one of the SFS grants, the Scholarship for Service grants, and I would go to SFS meetings and I would talk to people from other universities that had SFS grants. And students were coming to Purdue, and Purdue was a certain ecosystem to learn about cybersecurity, but to also launch students into their career in cybersecurity. And it was a very different ecosystem because Indiana is not a large in defense ecosystem. It's a manufacturing and an agriculture ecosystem. And that was very different than maybe sitting next to, Carnegie Mellon that's in Pittsburgh, or George Washington University that's in Washington, D.C., or the University of Maryland that's right there, in the NSA and intelligence community. And so I like to also think about how, when, and where, and why cybersecurity should develop in a particular ecosystem, to help that ecosystem do what it needs to do, but at the same time to help it serve its participants, its residents, its habitants, who may or may not stay in that particular ecosystem. So I try to think really carefully using all of these metaphors when I think about what could we do now in cybersecurity education and what should we do now in cybersecurity education. Because things that you can do are not necessarily things that you should do, and things that you should do aren't necessarily things that you can do. So I'm going to transition now and talk a little bit about my particular work. And this is really work that has been underway since I retired from Purdue in 2019. In late 2017, a set of guidelines was issued by a joint task force from the Association for Computing Machinery and IEEE. And it was a set of guidelines on what should be in an undergraduate cybersecurity degree. And those guidelines are now being used by ABET, which is the Accreditation Board of Engineering and Technology, to accredit undergraduate cybersecurity degrees across the United States. And that was really significant to me, because once we had those guidelines, I felt that we could start to express down to the high school level what from those guidelines would be considered introductory knowledge that you might see in a cybersecurity 101 course at the college level, or could even potentially see in a high school cybersecurity course. And the first time I was asked that question from a high school teacher, what should I teach in my high school class? What does Purdue University want me to teach in high school cybersecurity so that students would be prepared to come to Purdue? The first time I was asked that question was in 2015. And I thought it was a common sense and a good question, because we know that in a lot of other fields. We know what is in Math 151 at Purdue University, which is a calculus class. And we know what is in calculus, advanced placement calculus A and B at the high school level. We know what is in an intro to biology, an intro to chemistry, an intro to physics, and what can be in an advanced placement high school class in biology, chemistry, and physics. So using that, I thought, now that we have these CSEC guidelines to accredit higher ed, I'm going to try to build a set of guidelines that high schools across the country can use to develop cybersecurity courses in their high school, deliver those courses, and then try to work towards building dual and concurrent and placement credit pathways. So where we are with this work right now, the work is published. It got published 2 years ago. You can go to the teachcyber.org website and you can find the curriculum guidelines there. You can also go to the National Cryptologic Foundation. They were our partners and sponsors in doing this work. The guidelines themselves are based on 8 big ideas that we think are important to cybersecurity. I can quickly list those 8 big ideas. They're not necessarily in order of importance. So they are ethics, establishing trust, data security, network security, system security, adversarial thinking, risk, and implications. So each one of those big ideas in the body of knowledge of what is meant by them is expressed in these guidelines. So today, January 12th, 2022, there are about 600 registrants from all 50 states who use these guidelines. Those registrants, in some cases, in many cases, are high school teachers or state departments of education. Some of them are higher ed. We have a few industry and government users as well. I'm happy to say that there are also several curriculum development efforts that have used the guidelines to actually develop teaching materials. So when I think about curriculum guidelines, I think that they are an expression of what to teach. But when I think about curriculum materials, I think that it is giving high school teachers the resources to actually do that. So it's how to teach cybersecurity. So the curriculum development efforts that are underway include a project that I helped found called Teach Cyber. There's a consortium out of the University of Alabama that includes about 6 colleges, universities that are developing an online curriculum for rural and homeschooled students based on the guidelines. The Army JROTC is now developing a high school curriculum to be rolled out at JROTC schools based on the curriculum guidelines. There's some other local efforts. We know of some teachers in Colorado. There's a really cool effort by the deaf and hard of hearing schools across the United States. They've developed an online or a 1-year course for deaf and hard of hearing students at the high school level based on the guidelines. And just yesterday, I got contacted by some colleagues at the University of Texas, Austin, looking to develop a curriculum based on the guidelines. This work, the next step, I think, for the guidelines themselves is I hope to work with the ACM to revisit the guidelines and to make the guidelines an official publication of ACM that expresses what should be in a Cyber 1 class in the United States, regardless of whether that class is taught at the college level or at the high school level. So the second thing that I've been working really hard on is to give high school teachers courseware. And so we built a modular course. It's a year-long course, but teachers can take bits and pieces of it. They can eliminate some of it and turn it into a semester course. They can eliminate more of it and turn it into a 9-week course. We have other teachers who just take bits and pieces and make it into a 2-week or a 3-week unit on cybersecurity. The Teach Cyber courseware is available at no cost to teachers. We've been lucky so far, knock on wood, to get grant funding to make it available as a Creative Commons work to teachers across the United States. We have about 1,025. It might be 26 or 27. It seems like we get a new teacher at least every other day. From 48 states who are using our courseware. We currently hear things like, boy, your material is very current, it's very relevant, it's very engaging. We love the amount of active learning. We love the hands-on that you have. We partner with the US Cyber Range, which is a safe sandboxed environment so that students can get actual hands-on experience doing cybersecurity. Teachers say we like that it's sequenced, but it's highly adaptable. And we also frequently hear it's pretty easy for them to integrate that into their learning management system. So I'm going to go forward a slide, but before I do, what to teach, how to teach it. An assessment is the third critical piece of the triangle. So how do you know that they know it? And so that's what I wanted to talk about next, which is a project that just recently got funded by the National Science Foundation to develop assessment resources for cybersecurity. So we launched this project July the 1st. We have 4 things that we're trying to enable, if it makes sense, over the next 10 years. The first, which is really the focus of this grant, is to develop embedded classroom assessment resources. So the ARC project is developing assessment based on the high school cybersecurity curriculum guidelines. It will give teachers assessment items and a bank of assessment items that they can use, whether they're teaching the whole year-long course or a semester-long or a 9-week or just a 2-week unit. This could, I think, over the course of this 3-year project, I think there's the potential that it could start to grow into the possibility of a placement test. Just as we have AP Calculus A and AP Calculus B and AP Chemistry and AP Physics, maybe someday we could have an AP Computer or Cybersecurity test that would give students college credit for a course that they took at the high school level. Educational research in any field relies on valid, reliable, robust assessment. So the ARC project, I think, could be useful in educational research. And then finally, the way that we usually credential teachers to teach something at the K-12 level is through both a degree and a praxis test. And so there's the potential, let's not think in the next 3 years or 5 years or 7 years, but as cybersecurity scales up in high schools, maybe we'll reach in 10 or 15 years a point where we could have a need for a praxis test. I also tend to work in other areas to try to build awareness and interest in cybersecurity. It's a really young field in the K-12 space. I'm currently partnering with the Department of Energy to create a high school competition called Cyberforce Guardians. We're actively trying to work on creating club kits. Some schools need to get started teaching cybersecurity with an after-school club. So we're trying to enable that. Have a lot of conversation about how to extend the high school cybersecurity curriculum guidelines down to the middle school, back to that idea of building the pipeline. So I'm actively working there. The last thing I wanted to talk about with regard to work to date is another recently funded project funded by the National Security Agency. And it is the National Cybersecurity Teaching Academy. So the nonprofit that I founded, Dark Enterprises, is partnering with the University of Arkansas Little Rock, the University of Louisville, and DePaul University to offer a 12 credit hour graduate certificate to teachers. Will be a teacher credential. These would be in-service teachers, so they would already be out in the schools teaching, not getting their bachelor's degree. And we think it's the first of its kind in the United States. And so starting this summer of 2022, we will have 90 teachers, high school teachers from across the United States, earning this graduate certificate with a scholarship as a function of the support from the National Security Agency. So I'm really proud of this work, but why I think more help is needed is on this slide right here. The challenge is a big one. If we in fact need, and we could argue about whether it's 520,000 people or it's going to be 689,000, or maybe it's only 300,000, maybe it's only 200,000. If it's only 200,000 and we're currently producing about 23,000 from college, it still is a pretty significant shortage. You know, so I think the work is important work, but it's hard work. And it's hard work for a variety of reasons. Education is a state right in the United States. It's not federal. It's not easy to put your finger or to put your time and energy one place to try to affect policy change. It's 50 places. And then you work with states who say, look, we're a local control state. So when you talk to a state that says we're a local control state, they're telling you we really don't even have very many state mandates. You know, and so if you're talking to a local control state and you're working in a state that has 96 counties, there's 96 belly buttons that you have to push. So it's hard. I think if we could do more collaborative work, and I think that includes more meaningful work with industry, maybe we could move the needle a little faster, because we would have a common message to K-12. Even if we have a common message to K-12, the curriculum is crowded. K-12 education largely has a lot of mouths to feed and not nearly enough resources to do that. I've not been a part of trying to integrate computer science into K-12. That's not been my life's work, but I know a lot of people who have done it, and I've seen it as it has happened. They've been at this 20 plus years. And today, 2022, computer science is in 51% of the high schools in the United States, but it's not a part of the core curriculum. So 51% of the high school students in the United States are not taking computer science. So if you look at how hard, and they've accomplished so much to get to this point, but they've worked really, really hard. I think we need to start getting organized and ready to work that hard. And I think in the process of doing so, we need to make those people who have pioneered high school computer science possible. We need to make them our allies and work with them. Cybersecurity is still pretty new. The body of knowledge is not completely settled. Getting it a little more settled. I mean, I've been trying to help settle it. I've been trying to help define it. But getting it further defined and accepted is still some hard work that needs to be done and needs more hands and influencers interested in working on it. I was doing a series of focus groups with some industry people about this time last year, and I remember Tony Sager saying, and he's out in the workforce. He said, you know, I know we talk about those numbers all the time. He said, Melissa, I don't think we have a really nuanced understanding of the workforce demand in cybersecurity. So we're lacking that. And if you don't understand the nuances of the demand, it makes it hard to be responsive on building out a supply chain, you know, a human supply chain through the education system. And then you introduce things like artificial intelligence and the whole speculation that it's eventually going to make some of the low-level jobs obsolete, and we're not going to need people doing some of the lower-level functions. Is that the case? Is it not the case? How can you determine at what point you don't need some of those lower skill, lower-level jobs? Question mark, question mark. How do you do that? So I tend to think about all of these things. I tend to think about pipelines and pathways and ecosystems and what's the problem that could be solved, what's the problem that should be solved. I try to take tangible action steps to solving some of them in the absence of certainty. And in order to do that, I'm always trying to figure out, where do I get the time, not just my time, other people's time to work on these important problems? Where do I get the money? Where do I get leaders, champions who can help make it happen? How do we move forward on getting some actual policy? And how can you form meaningful cooperations that support the work? So I am at 5:15, and there's 2 questions in the chat window I haven't had a chance to look at. I ask, if any of this interests you, please reach out to me, and I'll open it up for questions and suggestions.
That's great, Melissa. Let's look to the Q&A of the 2 items there. One is, in fact, a question for you. Do you want me to read it to you, or you want to read it and respond?
Since it takes so incredibly long to affect K-12 curriculum, what ways have you identified to get K-12 engaged now? Clubs, competitions. There's not one way. the reason that I developed the guidelines and the Teach Cyber courseware the way I developed it is so it could be used by clubs, by competitions. It could be used in courses. It could be used in a computer science course. It could be used in an IT course. It could be used in a cybersecurity course, or it could become maybe more than one cybersecurity course. There's a thing in high school education called Perkins. And Perkins money funds, it is money that high schools can get for a pathway in a field. And a pathway is usually 2 courses. And because no 2 schools are in the same ecosystem, Doug, no 2 schools need to build the same pipeline. And so you have to think of how you develop platform capabilities that schools can take and customize to their local needs.
Great. Any other questions out there? There's one.
There probably are stats with countries other than the United States in this field. I've not, and Spaff said earlier, my work might even have had an impact internationally. If it has, I'm not aware of it, and I've intentionally not sought to try to go anything bigger than the United States. There's days I feel like I'm up to my ears in alligators just trying to do something meaningful in the United States.
Well, we know in other countries they're introducing computer science and programming at levels as low as 2nd grade.
Yeah.
So the fact that basically half of our schools have nothing in computer science yet indicates we are really a bit behind where some other countries are.
Yeah.
Oh, more questions popping up for you.
Yeah, this is a good question. Teaching methods, inquiry, inquiry-based learning, project-based learning, explicit direct instruction. When we built the Teach Cyber courseware, we thought about using project-based learning. We're big proponents for project-based learning and inquiry approaches. The reason we didn't do it is because then it creates a more dependent curriculum where everything feeds towards this ultimate project. And if you can't do the ultimate project, then it's hard to take the pieces and decompose it. And for the reason I mentioned earlier, we wanted something that was really adaptable and flexible. So we do a lot of active learning and a lot of hands-on learning. One of our rules of thumb was that no class should have any more than 10 minutes of teacher talk time, and then students should be actively thinking and doing. But our active learning is composed at a much more granular level than a course across the trajectory of the whole class. Well, thank you very much. Your question is, how important do I think gamified cybersecurity is? I'm not sure, Yancy, exactly what you mean by gamification. Sometimes that word means different things. I'm inferring that you mean a little bit about competitions when you ask about adversarial thinking. Sometimes people literally just mean a game. Like I have seen cybersecurity card games, and they call that the gamification of cybersecurity. the Department of Energy project that we're going to work on to bring their, you know how they've had that DOE, Argonne sponsors that competition. SPAF, I think Purdue students have participated in the Argonne competition. And so this is going to be a high school version of it. We're going to pilot test it this spring. That'll be my first time to be involved in a competition. I think that a competition doesn't guarantee that you are creating students who have the ability to think about adversaries and about adversity. My impression from what I've read in the literature and the students who I do know who have competed in competitions, is that it sometimes can be a rinse and repeat, and it doesn't necessarily hone in them the ability to constantly think about the unknown and to read something that is happening and to put together in the face of uncertainty in a systematic way, both to try to make conclusions about what might be happening and to form actions about what to do about what might be happening, even though you don't have proof that that's what's happening. So you have to always keep your mind open to the fact that you could be wrong. So that ability to both act on judgment at the same time that you're suspending final judgment, I think are some of the pieces of what it means to think about adversaries and to think about adversity. So if I were going to try to approach answering this question, that's the mindset I would take. You know, what does it mean to think adversarially? And then how do you design a learning experience that does that? I hope that helps. Yeah, I thought you meant competitions. Cybersecurity interacting with other school subjects. That's such a great question. I have seen cybersecurity taught in and taught by librarians, social studies teachers, science teachers, English teachers, math teachers, music teachers, special ed teachers. Sometimes it's cybersecurity, sometimes it's cyber safety. I'm actually a big advocate for the idea of cybersecurity being taught across the curriculum. The idea of that. But it's so much harder than it sounds. If you want, and there's a lot of research on teaching novices, where you're teaching subjects that you think they should be able to make the connection between, but if you don't teach them together and explicitly make the connection, they're unable to make it. They're novices. I mean, Spaff is an expert. He might be able to see two things and connect them right away in cybersecurity, but that is because he has decades of experience, and novices don't. And so I think sometimes we have to think carefully about trying to spread cybersecurity across the curriculum. And Junpei, this might not be exactly what you mean. But that's where I took the question, obviously. Spreading it across the curriculum. because the curriculum is so crowded that the school can't teach a dedicated cybersecurity course. I think that has to be approached with a lot of caution and probably just as much rigor as trying to put time and money into a dedicated cybersecurity course. Hi, Doug Rapp. Pathways that have funding tied to them, yes. IT was included, but cybersecurity has not specifically been included by the Department of Education. I think that that is true. I think that states are trying to move towards cybersecurity pathways. We're going to take our Teach Cyber courseware probably sometime in the next 6 months. And we're going to split it into 2 courses in response to multiple requests from Maryland, because if it were split into a 2-year sequence, it could be a cybersecurity pathway in Maryland. I've seen some early indicators that Indiana wants a course. I haven't seen an indication that they want a 2-year pathway in cybersecurity yet, Doug. I would love it if they would.
Well, great. We are out of questions and out of time.
Yeah.
So that was very nicely scheduled. Thank you so much for presenting today.
Before we log off, I just wanted to say thank you. You know, much of the last 22 years of my career, which I've really enjoyed, stems back to you.
Well, thank you. Sometimes I'm blamed for decades of things.
I mean, a lot of this stuff I've done, but you were a real source of inspiration for a lot of it.
Well, thank you. Well, you're not done yet. There's a lot left to do, and you're going to continue to do some great things. For those in the audience who are interested in further conversation on this topic, Melissa has had her email address up here for the last part of the talk, and we would certainly welcome you to come back at some time, tell us more. And so everybody else, we would hope you will come back next Wednesday at 4:30 for our next speaker. So thank you all. Have a great afternoon and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.